According to U.S. President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to the White House any day now for a meeting. Here are Trump's comments earlier today when asked about Carney's election win.
He called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." You know, he was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. You know, it was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
All right, well, Mark Carney is here in Ottawa preparing his minority government for the work ahead, and Louis Blouin is the parliamentary bureau chief for Radio Canada, and he joins me now. All right, Louis, well, that was some election analysis I never gave on Monday night, but that is the president's take on what happened. What do we know about the timing of Mark Carney's visit to the White House?
So we know it's going to be in the next few days, according to the president, and the office of the prime minister said yesterday that it would be in a close future. So let's guess a little visit next week, probably beginning of next week, to see the president at the White House. I found it interesting that he noted that the race is tight. It was tight here in Canada. So maybe he's prepping his leverage when he's going to negotiate with Mark Carney. You know, he might not be in a comfortable position of a majority government. So that he signals that is that, you know, it's going to be probably a tough negotiation with him. But it's going to be quite a test for Mark Carney. The expectations are very high, David, as you know, because the whole election was about that. And that's how he sold his message to Canadians. So every detail will matter. You know that the performance in front of the camera is maybe as important as what will happen behind closed doors. You know how Justin Trudeau at the time handled the handshake. How will Mark Carney do this time? So it's those small details that will be interesting to watch, but also what happens in the background. That means putting a frame around the negotiation that is coming with Canada on this economic agreement that Mark Carney has been talking about. One signal I got from a source in government is that they noted that the popularity of the president is going down at this time. That could give them some leverage, but I don't see Donald Trump doing a lot of concessions on what he wants. He talks a lot about, the milk sector. He talks about the wood, the softwood. He talks about cars. So we'll see where it goes, but it's going to be a high-risk operation next week.
Yeah, his popularity is going down. The economy's in contraction. Job rate is slowing, but here we are. He continues on. Okay, so Donald Trump is giving details on Mark Carney's itinerary, which may or may not be true. We are going to hear from the Prime Minister maybe tomorrow, more likely Friday, as I understand it, with an update on where they are in their transition process and when things are going to. What are you hearing about where they are in because they've got a bit more time than after he won the leadership. What are you hearing about the state of the more fulsome transition for Mark Carney?
So we're hearing that he's just now trying to place everybody in the important strategic positions around him. There's names circulating about a possible chief of staff. We know that Marco Mendicino is in that function at this time, but there's other names that are circulating. Cyrus Reporter was a former advisor to the Prime Minister that is circulating. Janice Charette, who was in charge of the transition also. So we'll see where it lands, and if Mr. Mendicino is staying around. Could there be other advisors that come maybe from Quebec or others? That's what we're going to be looking for in the next few days. Setting up the priorities for the next few weeks. Negotiation, yes, with Donald Trump, but also the bills that will be tabled in Parliament. So I have a big scoop for you. It's now on the calendar of the House of Commons. May 26th, it seems, is the beginning of the next session. And that's also what I'm hearing from a source. I was talking about the 26th, 27th of May, that Parliament would return. You know, there's going to be a throne speech. Budget after that, a few bills, I'm told, including the one to get those trade barriers down between the provinces. That would be before Canada Day, as the Mark Carney promised. So it's going to be quite a busy schedule for the next few weeks, for sure.
Yeah, all those people, Louis, said to us, so you'll get some downtime after the election. We're going to go right into a meeting at the White House. We're going to have the trade negotiations, and Parliament's going to come back as he lays out his legislative agenda.
I hope for at least a week of break, David, where we're not getting it. I don't know. I get used to it.
That's how we live now. Okay, so the other big thing that's got to happen even between now and then, Louis, with May 26th is the start of Parliament. the new cabinet. I know we have a new cabinet, but sort of, I don't want to say that's a fake cabinet, but the real cabinet, now that he's had an election, got some people to run for him, he's got to fill that out. Just as a final point, I mean, it's going to need to be bigger probably than it is now to make space for some of the new faces. What are you hearing there?
Absolutely. And we're hearing, and my colleague Laurence Martin was able to confirm that it's looking around more 30. We're around 20 now. It's more around 30, so it's going to be bigger, but not as big as Justin Trudeau's was. It was around 38. So I'm looking for a few names that could come into this cabinet. If you look at Quebec, Carlos Letao is the former Quebec finance minister in Quebec. You know, he has a good reputation. Could he end up somewhere in Treasury or something economic related? We'll see, but that could be interesting. I'm looking maybe at Evan Solomon also, who has a high-profile former reporter. He was
host of this show. I sit in that chair. Yeah,
exactly. And also Gregor Robertson, former Vancouver mayor. He's a very good politician too, so they might want to get him in the mix at some point. So we'll see where all of this lands, but there's going to be interesting choices. Could there be also people moving around, some titles who were consolidated that might be separated? We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, because those are three men that you named there, and he has promised a gender parity cabinet in this one. All right, Louis, always appreciate the intel. That is Louis Blouin, the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Radio Canada. Okay, all of this leaves us with a lot to dig into with the power panel. They're all here with me in the studio. Karleen Verheyen was a former Chief of Staff to multiple Liberal cabinet ministers. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. It's good to see you all again. Karleen, let's start with you. As the Liberal here, what do you know about what's going on in there? I mean, it seems like he's got a somewhat durable minority, given what's going on with the Conservatives and going on with the NDP. What do you expect to see in terms of the early stamp Mark Carney is going to put on things?
He's going to move fast. There's two reasons for that, I think. One, he's spent an election campaign now for 5 weeks talking about the urgency of meeting the moment, whether that is standing up to Donald Trump, including in a few days, as we're learning, as well as getting the country into a place economically where it can diversify its trading relationships away from the U.S. So I think you'll see things in swift order. So probably a cabinet in the next 14 days. I think we'll see Parliament resume probably after the Victoria Day long weekend. You'll have a speech from the throne, which will kind of lay out that broad agenda. We would expect to have published mandate letters as well, where we see kind of what each minister's priority is. And then they'll bring Parliament back. It will be a unique Parliament in the sense that both of the two major party leaders, well, two of the three, I should say, without Yves-François Blanchet, won't be there. You'll also have a Prime Minister and a Liberal Party leader who's taking his seat in the House of Commons for the very first time, doing his very first question period. A lot of firsts. And amidst all that, he's probably going to need to table a budget, at least a mini budget, deliver on some first key campaign commitments. Then he's got to go out to Kananaskis and host the G7 Leaders Summit by June 15th. So
that's a slow schedule we were all promised after the April 28th vote. Tim, Louis' sources, my sources, Ashley Burke and others have been hearing it would be May 26th for Parliament. It's now on the House of Commons website, as Louis pointed out, so I guess our scoop is accurate. It's interesting, the amount that has to happen between now and then, because the country does not have a budget because of the prorogation that happened. It still functions legally under interim supply, but he's got a lot of big things to do in this short period of time while also dealing with Donald Trump just on the parliamentary side of things.
Yeah, there's another clock too, right? There's the immediate and then there's the clock of opportunity. And I think, as we know about minority governments, you get more done in the beginning, though I think he will try and govern as he should, like Stephen Harper did in 06 and 08 to begin with, as his opposition is figuring out their own challenges and opportunities. And that's his nature anyway. I mean, he describes himself as a hockey player, which he is, but he's also a runner, and he's used to going and going and going and going. And if he is going to be a prime minister, as he talked about, who wants to do transformative things, it's a lot easier to try and jam them all in at the front when nobody else can put up their hand and say no, or we're not prepared for that. The thing I firmly believe too, and Karleen's heard this already today, so I apologize to her, I think Mark Carney, sorry Liberals, is going to be a prime minister who recognizes that if he's going to do a lot, he's going to care about getting that done in a short period of time and will pay less attention to getting re-elected. That he's going to be a one-term prime minister, but the hell of an active one, and he's going to do as much as he can in that term to do it. And I think he feels unencumbered as other politicians have. So the pace we're going to get now, maybe the pace we get till it's slowed down after the other parties deal with their own difficulties.
Look at Tim trying to fire the starter's pistol on a Liberal leadership race when Mark Carney hasn't even been 4 days since he won the election.
Love that energy.
But Jordan, it does seem like he is determined to be decisive and swift-moving, which, in the early days of Trudeau, there was a bit of that. It got a little bit more deliberative, shall we say, as they went on. Even with the minority, it seems like he has a mandate to focus on these big things, and the structure of the parliament certainly seems to give him the breathing room for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you remember Deliverology, that brief.
I do remember that.
Yeah. It was a brief interlude, but look, he has to move quickly, and I think that that's a huge part of the appeal that he was presenting to voters during the election, was the idea that he was going to come in, he was going to take charge of this threat from Trump and make some swift changes that are going to protect Canada from that. He also has a political incentive and necessity to move quickly. I think his honeymoon ended the minute he stepped off his stage from the victory speech. There is going to be very little tolerance if it's seen that he's not delivering some results on these things. So these first 100 days, I would argue, are going to be more crucial for him than they have even been for previous prime ministers. The votes that he got that allowed him to get his government that ended up being a little smaller than they were hoping for, a lot of those votes were loaned, particularly from the New Democrats. And it's easy for those to go back if those people aren't seeing results for what they hired him for effectively, which is to deal with the Trump problem. So I think he's wise to move quickly. Whether he's going to be able to move quickly, though, in this configuration of Parliament is a question that we don't yet know the answer to. Because while he may be tempted to govern as though he has a majority, the actual seat makeup means that that's going to be very challenging.
Yeah, like Sherelle, I know the New Democrat argument that the vote was lent, but of the 17 seats he lost, 10 of them went Conservative because they picked up a lot of Democrat votes, particularly in southwestern Ontario. The Bloc vote got lent in a big way in Quebec too, right? But whoever it is, he does have this expectation of delivery, and right out of the gate, you got the president saying, "Yeah, he's coming here next week." And I talked to a Liberal like, "Oh, I guess I better find out if that's true." But I mean, what do you expect to see in the initial push here?
Yeah, I think like what everybody said, there's going to be, and there has to be that quick push right out the gate. But I do think that, to Tim's point about he's not worried about being reelected, we should be so lucky to have all politicians have that mindset of not worrying about, am I going to get reelected, instead of, am I going to deliver for Canadians? Because that is what people at this point really want to see. They want to see, are we going to get what we were promised in this election, which is how do we deal with Donald Trump?
Yeah.
And that's a really tall order because, as docile, if you will, as Donald Trump sounded today, we know that he turns on a dime. Yeah. So Mark Carney can go down there and have what he thinks is a really good conversation with the American president. And by the time he leaves the room, Trump could be posting on Truth Social that's completely, different to whatever it is that they actually talked about. And, whether or not you want to pretend or say that Trump is, has some sort of machinations and this was all part of his master plan as to, who he wanted to get elected in the Canadian election.
No.
Like, which is not the way to go. But if you wanted to think about it in that frame to a degree, then, he doesn't have to worry now about who his Canadian counterpart is. That's already decided. He already knows that it's going to be Mark Carney. He knows this is who he's going to be dealing with for the long term. So he doesn't have to, play any games on that front. He can now do what he wants. He always does what he wants,
sure.
but he can. But knowing who's across the table from him, that sets the stage, that sets the table. And whether Canadians are going to get what they want out of this negotiation, that's a different question. But he absolutely has to move quickly to do it.
Yeah, Carlene, just a final point to you. I mean, since Volodymyr Zelensky went to the Oval Office, there is downside risk to those appearances. Now, I'm 100% positive that Mark Carney will wear a suit. I don't know if I've seen, other than the dancing
well, and I hope
hoodie.
it's not a meeting that happens in front of the cameras.
Well, but it's a part of it will be, though.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty clear because, the Canadian media will travel on this and they'll want at least a spray of that to get a sense of it. Yep. So just, we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamic in Parliament without Pierre Poilievre in a bit, but just the importance of that just optically and tonally. I mean, what does that need to look like for this to be a promising start for the Prime Minister?
The pressure on any Canadian Prime Minister who has dealt with Trump, which is effectively just Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney, has always been immense. Anytime there's been a state visit, I think the nation has collectively held its breath, and we have good reason to, right? I mean, think about when Trump came to Canada's last hosting of the G7 in Charlevoix in, I believe it was 2018, where Trump got mad right at the end and flew off early in a huff and didn't sign the communique because Justin Trudeau had ticked him off.
No, he
right?
signed it, but then he unsigned it from the air on his way to meet the North Korean
That's right.
dictator.
That's
because,
right.
you know, that's how it works, right?
Yeah, so historically, these meetings have sometimes been very challenging.
Yeah.
I think that for Mark Carney, it's also a challenge because although he has a lot of experience in boardrooms, he's, again, a brand new politician. And so he will be approaching this not with a lot of deep political experience, but a different set of experience.
Right.
So I think that there'll be a lot of pressure on him. I also don't think we're going to see a lot come out of that first meeting. It's very likely to be a little bit anticlimactic. A cordial conversation, a communique that agrees to begin a CUSMA negotiation in
Maybe
the
who
coming
the
months.
lead negotiators are, these sorts of things, right? It
Exactly.
could be something like that.
Exactly.